Hello, and welcome to Leadership, Relationships, and Change. We're excited to be here with you today talking about the essential shift to purpose-driven leadership. And that sounds like a lot of jargon, so we're going to break that down and make sure that we all understand what we're talking about. So I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Drum McNaughton of thechangeleader.com. So how are you this morning, Drum?
Aloha, baby.
Oh, yeah, look at the shirt. Can you tell where he just came back from?
Yeah, we had a great trip over to Hawaii, meeting with some folks over there in the education area, and it was just a great trip. You know, I love the islands as it is, and a great place to lay back, good food, good people, good climate. What more can you ask for?
The client paying for the trip.
Well, no, that's a bonus.
Yeah, I could be better. Someone said to me this morning on a call, "Oh, what would you like?" And I said, "Well, as you know, I'd like some." And he said, "Oh, I know someone who can arrange that." I'm going, "You, I'm all for that, right?" So I'm Dr. Roberta Shaler, the Relationship Help Doctor, and you can learn more about me at forrelationshiphelp.com. And my specialty is working with the partners, the exes, the adult children, and the co-workers of what I call chronically difficult people. And I coined a term for them. They're called hijackals. These are people who hijack relationships for their own purposes while relentlessly scavenging them for power, status, and control. So if you know any of those people, go to hijackals.com and download my free ebook, How to Spot a Hijackal, so you can be sure. So today we're playing on a topic that we've spoken of before in our other blabs, and we invite you to go and check those all out because everyone is on a different topic, obviously. But we mentioned in a previous blab about purpose-driven leadership. Would you like to define that for us, Drum?
Purpose-driven leadership is something that is focused on where you're going. You have a specific purpose in mind. It's generally more known in nonprofit organizations, but with millennials and other generations coming into the workplace, most of them have a cause, something that they believe in. And so the purpose-driven leadership from their perspective is, am I doing something that I believe in, that matches up, it's in attunement with my own value system?
So I want to go to work every day because it's a fit for me, and I know that we're all collaborating toward the same end.
And most importantly, it's from a values perspective. Some people will call it spiritual leadership, you know, working for God or working for a particular cause. It's interesting because most millennials that I speak to, they have a very strong value system. It may not be apparent, but when you dig down, they believe, you know, take a look at Bernie Sanders' political campaign. His biggest supporters are millennials, you know, the younger generations. They believe in free education. They believe in the values that he's talking about. And so that's a purpose-driven leadership.
Okay. So millennials are an interesting litmus test for purpose-driven leadership because so frequently I'm not sure if they're purpose-driven or they're personally driven. What's the distinction
Sometimes there is no difference. Sometimes it's one and the same. Their personal values, sometimes they're aware of them, sometimes they're not. One of the stories I think we've talked about before is I was teaching a course in organization development, and we had 3 different types of students in there. We had folks in an organization leadership curriculum. There were some in a health sciences, and there were some in a HR. Common thread across it was millennials and Gen Xers that were in the class. And the millennials had a very different perspective on jobs than did the Gen Xers, and especially the baby boomers. You know, one of them says, I really like this job. I may stay here another 9 months. I'm going, seriously? You're going to move? He says, oh, yeah. If I didn't like it, I'd just quit today. No safety net, nothing. Their values have to match up with the values of the organization for which they're working. It's that simple.
So have they stopped being concerned about what the resume looks like by job hopping?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. The perception that we as boomers have is that it's important to stay with a job for a long period of time. That is changing. They look at more experience and a varied experience than they do deep experience in one area. That's really hurting organizations as well, because I've got colleagues that work for Fluor, F-L-O-U-R, the big construction firm, or even in NASA and some of the aerospace companies. What they're seeing is people are moving from job to job, and then they want to come back, they want a higher salary, but they don't have the deeper experience. And if you take a look at folks at NASA, you've got folks there who have been with NASA for 30 years. They worked on the lunar module, maybe not the lunar module, but some of the Apollo program or the space shuttle. They've got this deep astrophysics and aerospace backgrounds, whereas the newer folks coming in, they move from job to job to job, and they don't have that deep experience. It's really important that they get it.
Yes, well, we certainly have a much more mobile workforce, but the idea of quitting today because I like it, or deciding that a long-term commitment is 9 months, that's a bit surprising to me, because when you think about how long it takes to get up to speed in a job, and then the chaos that's created when you leave and somebody else has to come and go through that process, that can be very expensive in terms of personal expense, but also, of course, in terms of financial expense, and to the productivity and effectiveness of the company. So when we're talking about people moving that quickly, it really raises a red flag for me. Like, can you really make a contribution in 9 months that would be worth my writing a letter of recommendation for you?
They think very differently than we do. If the value system isn't there with the organization that matches their value system, they don't look at it for the most part as, I need to make my value system fit the organization. It's more of, I need to have the value system fit my value system.
But why don't they do that in a job interview? Why don't they change the way that they interact during an interview so that they're not wasting?
They don't look at it that way.
So it's interesting. We've got lots of people online here. If you have something to say, certainly type it in the chat box. Or if you have a question, put /Q and then type your question, and we'll be sure to answer it. What's your experience with millennials? Are you one? And what do you think about this conversation? So back to that, Drum, I really wow. If I'm just shopping for a job, and I think I'll just go try one on without asking good questions and without divulging anything about my background, I certainly am taking a very different approach to the work world.
I wouldn't say that they don't divulge anything about their background. They come in, they do their homework to be able to get in. Remember, too, they've got many of them have a very large network, so it helps to bring people on. Whereas our generation, we don't necessarily have that same kind of network that we did before. Our network has moved on, different things, etc. And we're not willing to start out down at the bottom. I know one of the stories that I heard, which I thought was pretty amusing, was a new person, 22, 24 years old, walks into a corporation, says, this is what my demands are. And 100,000 salary, et cetera, et cetera. And the HR person didn't miss a beat. Says, oh, well, we were gonna give you 120. Would that be okay? Oh yeah, that's perfectly fine. And about 5 minutes later, the HR person said, seriously, you're not going to get more than 30,000. They just have these expectations which really aren't realistic. My folks, they worked hard. My dad and mom were children of the Depression. They wanted to make sure that their kids had better than they did. And they worked very hard, and they instilled a very very good work ethic into us. The kids nowadays, us as parents, we wanted to make sure that our kids had better than we did, but we forgot something and this isn't carte blanche, this isn't everything, but this is a generality. We forgot to make kids work and show them the value of hard work. Most of them just expect that they're going to be given these kind of things. And, it's sad. That's not a failure on their part. It's a failure on our part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. I mean, Gen X is known for that, and Gen Y has their own issues. But I'm surprised to hear you speak about the millennials in this way. So when we're thinking about purpose-driven leadership, I think about it in an additional way. I agree with what you're saying, but I think about it in a different way. That the people at the top of the organization are very, very clear, not only about the purpose of the organization, but they drill down to find what is the purpose and how does it match the values of each individual person, and they build out from there. Do you find organizations doing that or willing to do that?
To some degree, I do, yes. Organizations are starting to adapt to the younger generations being in the workforce. And there are certain things that are
like we didn't know was going to happen.
Right? We talk about 5 generations in the workplace, and it's interesting because we talk about Gen X, Gen Y. Gen Y, the other word for that is millennials. So Gen Y and millennials are the same thing. Now we're coming into Gen Z, which are the teenagers that are starting to come in. This is one of the reasons we have so many generations in the workplace. Organizations are adopting to millennials. And, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, one of the things I'm interested in is some of the people that I work with and I really appreciate who are much younger. One of the things I find is that they think and talk fast. And there are very few spaces in their language. Have you ever found that?
No, I haven't really. What I find is they form relationships differently than we do. They form relationships online through their devices. I mean, it's amazing. And it's unfortunate too, because I see boomer parents doing the same thing at this point. Is the family will go out to dinner, the husband and the wife will be sitting there texting or doing something at dinner, the kids will be doing the same things. I thought the point of all going out to dinner was to be together as a group. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's just so somebody doesn't have to cook. I don't know. Call me a dinosaur. I just don't understand these things sometimes.
Well, I think that's really worth talking about because I work with families, I work with couples all the time. And there was a great graphic on Facebook the other day, and it was a couple, and the woman took the guy's cell phone and she taped it to her head, and she said, "Now will you look at me when I talk?" Right? And we're missing something. We're missing the human contact. I think that we're fooling ourselves by thinking we're having human contact here. This is information. This is, for many people, it's like, how important am I? How many things am I getting? How many people want to stay in touch with me? Frankly, I don't care what you had for dinner. I don't care where you're going for coffee. I don't care about any of those things. So please don't bother telling me. But they believe that, it's essential. The world evolves around me. I need to tell everybody where I am. That's not a relationship, folks. Relationship is something that you have that is ongoing exchange, in which communication takes place, as opposed to being on your device communicating. Communicating means I send a message. Communication means I am absolutely sure that the message was received in the way I intended it, and I don't move forward until I know that for sure. And that's not what's happening on these devices.
I would challenge you on that, because their perception, the millennials and Gen Zs, their perception is that they are communicating. And right.
I know.
And are they in their own way? Yes, they are. This is their perception. Now, is it the perception that we use? No. No, it's very different. You know, you've got a psychology background. I have a background in organization, transformation, change, which involves psychology. For us, communication is very different. Why did I fly over to Hawaii? I can have a conversation on the telephone, but for me and what I do, nothing takes the place of sitting across from someone, even on Skype or on Blab like this, where I can see your face. I can see the body language. I can see you talking or not talking with your hands. Are you nodding? Are you in agreement with what I'm saying? You can't see that necessarily on a device. But their perception, and I'm not sure why it is they are in fact communicating. Are they?
Well, I think the perception is quite there, but the fact that you're bringing up is, are they or are they not communicating? Or are they just filling the space? You know, if you put it in conjunction with this whole selfie thing, you know, really, do I need to see you in every possible configuration and every person that you've met and every place you've stood in front of? No, I don't need that. That is not communicating anything to me except how extremely self-centered you are and that you don't have anything to say about anything else. Now, I understand when you're young, that's the culture. That's what's big. That's, you know, all that. But I was recently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm in this beautiful hall, all Roman Greco stuff, 25-foot ceilings, massive number of artifacts. And I'm sitting down looking at things. I look over and I took a photograph of 3 kids on their cell phones. And they never looked up. I sat there for 4 minutes. They never got off their phones. I mean, I was desperately hoping that they would look up and look back so that they were following some kind of online guided tour of the artifacts. But no, they weren't. They were on their phones, as though being where you are, being present where you are, choosing to go somewhere that you wanted to be present to was not enough. I'm here, but I want to be in touch with everywhere else. I'm here, but I want to be with those other people too. Bifurcated. And I thought, wow, what happens if you go home and you say, well, I went to the Metropolitan Museum. What did you see? Well, nothing. So is it about I went to the Met, or is it about I stayed in touch with all my friends, right? And I don't have a value judgment about it. I just had an observation about that, because that was just so very unusual, right? To just see that. And then I came home and I did some research, and sure enough, there are a whole lot of museums who have programs online that you can follow along on your cell phone now. So there was a possibility that that really was what was going on. But if we have purpose-driven organization or purpose-driven leadership, we also have the opportunity of asking ourselves, do we have a purpose-driven life?
Absolutely. And that's, to me, the essence of purpose-driven leadership is it part of a purpose-driven life? What is your goal? Why are you doing what you're doing? Is there a reason for it at all, consciously or unconsciously? That's the key, for me anyway. We had somebody else join us.
Do you think people are that, hi, Kalu. Do you think people are that self-referential, that they're self-reflective, that they're spending a lot of time finding out what their what it is that's driving their life and selecting it on purpose?
I think more are now than there used to be, because the people who are being born now tend to have a little more self-awareness than we did when we were born. At most, it's just very general, but I would say they do. But I think it still takes a digging down to really understand who you are and why you're here to be able to get there.
Mm-hmm. And that's why my question, are people becoming more self-reflective? Like I look at my grandson and I think, wow, are you really choosing your life, or is life just happening to you? Right? And I don't know the answer to that question for him, but it's a question that comes up for me. Do you just wander where you want and see what happens, or do you make a decision and move toward a goal? What do you actually do? So thank you for holding that up. When you go to my website at For Relationship Help, you'll see a lot of blogs on things like we're speaking about here, and things that are particularly pertinent to your own relationship with yourself and other people. So this relationship with yourself piece of knowing what purposes are driving your life, what values are demonstrated every day, and becoming conscious and intentional about doing that is a big change from having a life that is just reactive and responsive to what's going on. And I really invite any of you listening here to comment on that. Just type it into the chat bar. I mean, do you sit down and have some time with yourself daily to find out who am I and what's up with me today? Or do you kind of put yourself on autopilot and then just wait to see what happens, or somewhere in between? What's your way of doing things? It's an important question to answer for ourselves. I know I feel kind of footloose when I don't have time every day that's just for sitting quiet. How about you?
I'm that way. Every morning I start my day with a meditation. I end it with a meditation. And that's part of my reflective time of understanding who I am. And I get great insight into that type of thing. I think a lot of folks are beginning to do this. I wouldn't say a lot, I'd say more than others as well. I'm sorry, seeing a finger pointing one way versus the other, and I'm getting confused. I think more people are meditating than there used to be, and I think there is more of a, more millennials are than we did as a generation when we first came in. I think they're smarter and more highly evolved, but at the same time, I don't think they really know where they're going as well as they did. But when I look back to where we were years ago, how many of us at that age knew where we were going? I didn't.
But we knew we were supposed to be going somewhere. That's what we were taught. Like you need to have a plan, and you need to stick with it, and you need to have a long range plan, and you need to think about, I remember I was born on a large island, and it seemed like if you got a job at the mill and you retired from there and you got a Winnebago, then you had made it, right? And it's just generally that was the one way that we figured it out. Like, if you could go through this process, that would be a really good thing to do, and you would end up having a lovely life when you retired. I don't think that my grandchildren think that way. I think they think about tomorrow and maybe next week, and maybe a little beyond that in terms of what would I like to do for a career. But I don't think that they have a long-term vision that I was certainly raised to have. And I'm not saying that has or has not value. I'm just saying it's different.
Yeah, I haven't had enough conversations with folks to do that kind of thing. I know from my own, my nephew and niece, they had a vision of what they wanted to do. The vision changes, just like ours did from time to time. I think they do have that. I think they strike out and they may not know how to achieve that. But that's the same thing like us too. It's kind of trial by error. You know, we see things that because of our experience, we know or we think, why are you doing it this way? This makes no sense from where we come from. But frankly, from where they are, it makes perfect sense. And so we learn our way. Other people learn their own ways. It doesn't mean that one's right, one's wrong. It's just a different way of learning.
And I think too, we have to be agile. You know, if we go back to a purpose-driven leadership, what if we don't have our finger on the pulse of what's happening culturally or trends or economically, and our purpose-driven organization needs to be tweaked a little bit? Maybe we need to become more specific. Maybe we need to keep up with the times. So being in review much of the time seems important to a purpose-driven organization.
Yes. And, you know, when we go, I'm going back to Tennessee to work with an association back there. They just changed executive directors. 38 years the previous guy was in the job, so it's a major shift for them. We're going back to figure out, is the vision for the place still correct? Is the mission still right? We all should do this from time to time. Are we headed down the right path? And how do we know?
Absolutely.
How do we know we are?
Yeah. And to take a new inventory. How have I changed in the last 2 years or 3 years or 5 years? And is it appropriate for me to be still going in this personal direction, or behaving this way in a relationship, or being at this stage of a relationship? That's really an important part of the self-reflective process, is doing a new inventory and catching up with ourselves. My partner and I wrote a book called Soul Solitude, taking time for our souls to catch up. And we invite people to take that time, you know, have that self-reflective time. What's changed for me? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What do I need? What do I want right now? That all changes. And if we don't stay true to ourselves and catch up with ourselves, then we might be living from who we thought we were supposed to be 5 years ago.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. When I went to the Naval Academy, I had been accepted at Purdue at the College of Engineering, and that's what I wanted to do. And everyone told me, oh, the Naval Academy, it's a great opportunity. You can't afford to turn it down. So I ended up going. Was it what I was supposed to do? Well, it's what I did. And ultimately, you know, you have to say, is it the right thing? Well, obviously it was, because that's what I did. But was it in line with my true purpose? Maybe yes, maybe no. I'm not in the Navy now. Did I learn good lessons? Absolutely. Did lessons that I still put in effect? Sure. Would I have learned those lessons other places? Probably. Who knows?
But we were, you know, as you said earlier, Drum, we were raised by parents who had lived through the Depression. And that gives a particular spin to everything. You're supposed to be doing things that make you secure and stable and nail things down so that you don't have to worry if a horrible thing happens or if something unexpected takes you down. And it changes the way that we look at things. And for younger people today, they're more agile, they're more resilient, they're used to a lot of change. We've had so many more changes in our life in the last 25 years, right? That we can't predict. Many of them got out of school or out of college at a time when there were jobs. You know, all their lives they thought there would be a job. All I have to do is do this right or go to college and there'll be a job. Now there's no job. I have to be agile. I have to be resilient. I have to be flexible in my thinking. And what does that do? What attributes does that cause people to create so they're valuable to an organization?
Well, you know,
there's so much.
You're absolutely right in that. there's one common denominator there is most, not all, but most have mom and dad to fall back on. You've got so many of these folks who are actually living at home because they want to save money, yeah, and that's a good thing, or they can't find a job or whatever. So the economy in some ways just plays into this type of thing, but there's always that safety net there called M&D.
Yeah, well, I think that safety net should be an emotional one, and I understand for many people it's had to be a financial one. But this conversation could go on forever, I think. And just so that you remember, if you want to learn more about Dr. Drum McNaughton, you can go to thechangedleader.com. If you want to learn more about me, Dr. Roberta Shaler, the relationship help doctor, you can go, yeah, see, it works backwards. You can go to forrelationshiphelp.com. And if you're in relationship with a chronically difficult person who's causing you to second guess yourself and question your sanity, go to hijackals.com and download my free ebook, How to Spot a Hijackal, because you need very specific strategies for dealing with people who have hijackal tendencies. So, any words of wisdom to end our time together today, Drum?
Don't drive with my friend. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, don't drive with my friend.
Yeah.
Doesn't know right from left, you know?
Yeah. That person. That's stealing something from the Tappet brothers from NPR. Don't drive with my brother.
Right. Don't drive with my brother. Yeah. Well, I would certainly suggest that there's lots of conversation that will spawn off from this one, and we're here every week at Leadership's Relationship and Change, and we invite you to join us then. Tell your friends, subscribe to the blab so you'll know when we're on, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next week, Drum.
And you too. Aloha.
Aloha.